Now it's time to introduce our honored lecturer this evening, Dr. Mike Lang, a health researcher and award-winning filmmaker. Mike is a two-time UCalgary alum, completing his MSc in Community Health Sciences in 2015 and his PhD in Nursing in 2022. He is an award-winning documentary filmmaker, health researcher, certified Level 3 Common Language Digital Storytelling Facilitator, and an adjunct assistant professor in the Faculty of Nursing at the University of Calgary. Mike's scholarly research spans digital storytelling, adolescent and young adult oncology, global health, and the medical humanities. His professional and research focus is on using digital storytelling and documentary filmmaking in education, advocacy, quality improvement, research, and therapeutic contexts within healthcare and wellness. Since his own cancer diagnosis at the age of 25, Mike has been deeply involved in developing programs for cancer survivors and their supporters across North America. Today, he applies those skills globally, creating films and teaching digital storytelling to advance health and wellness. He has directed and produced 6 documentaries, 3 web series, and numerous educational video curricula about the human health experience. Mike has also facilitated the creation of more than 1,000 digital stories with patients, families, caregivers, and healthcare professionals worldwide. Welcome up, Mike.
Well, I am very happy to be here, very honored to be here with all of you, and also just very honored that you decided to spend your Saturday night with me and with everyone else here. I always say the people who come to something like this are probably the coolest people that you want to hang out with. So I think we should probably just start with a really quick high five, 5 people around you saying you're super cool and I'm glad you're here tonight. I always think, and I honestly believe that, people who are interested in stories, and interested in storytelling, and in conversation and learning more about the stories and experiences of the people around them, really are some of the special people in this world, right? And I think a lot of times now, when we think about storytelling, the stories that we engage with a lot now, they're written out by screenwriters, right, and novelists, and acted out by actors and actresses, right? And we don't often engage with the real stories like we used to. And one of the things that I love about my job is I get to do these things called kitchen table nights. And we sit around on Zoom sometimes, or in person, we watch stories and we talk about it. And in that process, we get to learn so much about life, about what it means to live a good life. And so anyways, that's why I'm excited for all of you to be here tonight, because we are going to watch some stories. But before we jump into that, I just have to acknowledge a couple people. Dr. Nancy Moles, who was my guide and mentor for this chat tonight. And of course, Dr. Catherine Lang, who a lot of people don't know, was my PhD supervisor. She suffered with me for 5 years, 5 whole years. It's amazing that I'm here tonight based on what I put her through. But there's also lots of other faces in the crowd here that have taught me things, or have been my friend, or we've watched stories, we've had conversations together. And I want to start by sharing, everything that you'll hear tonight is really probably a reflection of the conversations and the stories that I've shared with many of the people here in this room, even all the way down to my parents, right? Some of the things that they taught me over the years. And that's why I really like this image here. Right, there's one person standing there, but in the shadow, in the reflection, you see there's many people, right? And I think, despite the rugged individualism, that maybe, we like to emphasize sometimes in North America or in Alberta, one of the biggest things that I've learned, I think, over the past 15 years, is that all of us are reflections of the people around us, right? We are not individuals. And one of my favorite words that I ever learned, actually, that sort of speaks to this idea, is this word Ubuntu. Has anyone heard this word before? Yes, we got a couple. Yeah, I heard it the first time a couple years ago when I was down in South Africa and working on a project down there to support mothers and children who are born with albinism, because they don't get treated very well in the healthcare system or by the society down there. We're trying to change people's beliefs, attitudes, and values by sharing their stories to nursing students and midwives and medical students as well. This word, it comes from the language down there, the Bantu languages in the area. And Ubuntu, basically, it's a philosophy, but really, the translation is, I am because we are. Right? I am because we are. And when I first heard it, I was like, oh, this is exactly what I've seen in my own life in the past 15 years. There's all these shadows, all these people who are reflected in the things that I understand about the world and the conversations I've been able to have about what it means to live well in the midst of some very difficult circumstances. And so I'm going to circle back to this word by the end of the lecture, but I wanted to start there because I wanted to acknowledge up front a lot of the things that you will hear tonight have come from others, right? And this is simply a reinterpretation, my interpretation of some of these conversations, these really meaningful stories that I've been able to hear thousands of over the years now too. So I know maybe a bit of a philosophical way to start off. I promise though there will be lots of great stories tonight as well. I've curated a list of some digital stories and a short film that we're going to watch tonight. And the first one is actually the very first digital story that I made. And for those of you who don't know, a digital story is a short 2 to 3 minute film that is created by someone with the support of a trained facilitator. And that's when Catherine said over 1,000 digital stories. That's what I do with people, is I get to sit down and help them make short films about their own life, using their own words, their own images. They often do the video editing themselves. I just get to guide them through the whole process. And we'll talk a little bit more about that tonight. But that, my very first digital story about my own cancer experience, we're going to watch. And that's going to help us think a little bit more about the title of the lecture, You Might Be Right, and then also this idea of fusion of horizons, an idea we'll explore. Then we're going to watch another story by a woman named Emily. And her story is actually made as part of a project with the Grief Support Program here in Calgary. And through it, we're going to talk a little bit more about this idea of aletheia. Aletheia. I always say it wrong, and Nancy always corrects me. Aletheia. And this idea, another idea called aquifers of meaning. And this is going to help us think about how stories work. How do stories work? What do they do when we engage with a story? And then finally, we're going to watch an episode from a series I did called Caregivers in the Wild, called The Nature of Healing. And we have the 2 stars of that episode here tonight with us. And so, Cynthia and Cheryl, can you give everyone a quick wave? There they are. Yes. They're here with us. I dragged them around all over the place. And they're very happy to sign autographs afterwards. So make sure you'll go find them, get the autographs. And this is going to help us think a little bit more about some final ideas around interpretation before I try and bring it all together to talk about how I think all of these ideas could have value for us having meaningful conversations in what I think we can all agree is becoming a more polarized world that we live in. And so that's sort of where we're headed tonight. Luckily, though, no matter what I say, we're watching movies. That's the best thing about being a filmmaker, is you get to watch movies, And the movies often have more to say than I do myself. And so you guys will get to watch these films, and it's my hope that from these stories, you'll gain something called phronesis. Has anyone heard of this word? Yes, a few? Okay, the ancient Greeks had this wonderful word, phronesis, and it means practical wisdom, or wisdom that comes from experience. And, that's one of the things that I really think is amazing about a good story that's well told, right? It's because all of us only get to live one life, right? We can only have so much experience. And I think everyone here understands the importance of experience, right? Nurses understand the importance of experience, right? Experience tells you that person about to crash, even though their vitals are okay right now. Experience tells you how to ask that one little question when something seems a little off in a clinical conversation, that one more probing question. Experience is what teaches you how to sit with someone when their loved one is passing away in front of them, right? This is what experience gives us. These things are hard to teach. They come from experience. But one of the ways that we can gain experience of the world is through the stories of others, right? For just a few minutes, we get to live in their life and gain the experience that they may have gained over 10 or 15 years of their life. They can transmit it to us through a story. And so that's why, no matter what I say tonight, I know hopefully you guys will come away with some things because of the stories that Emily and Cheryl and Cynthia are going to share with us tonight in these stories. But before we do, they mentioned I should probably explain how I got here because I don't think the most prescient guidance counselor could have seen this coming. Like there's no way. It's a strange path, for me to get to this point. So in between the stories and some of the philosophy, we'll talk a little bit more about how I got here. It's even stranger when I show you this photo. Because for me, my only life goal was to ski 200 days a year. That was it. So that's me. I was after doing a 4-year degree in recreation. They have those, right? 4 years. 4-year degree in recreation. I went up to Whistler, and I was a ski patroller in Whistler, sort of living the life. My only goal, apart from skiing 200 days a year, was to sleep outside more than I was sleeping inside. And that was actually pretty easy at the time because I was living in my van. So, and coincidentally, my van was often parked down by the river. And so it was very, it was not a great way to introduce myself to my future father-in-law. He was not super impressed with that. But I lived in my van down by the river, and I was a ski patroller, and that was all I wanted. But around this time, I started having some problems breathing. And I was pretty sure it was asthma. And then I got really sick, and I had to leave early from that season. And I kept going to these clinics, walking clinics. I had a family doctor. I was 25. And they kept giving me asthma medications. Nothing was working. And eventually, one day, as I was about to leave, one of the clinic nurses to a clinic that I'd been to a few times, the nurse, she came back in as I was about to leave. The doctor had left already. And she said, you've been here a few times, haven't you? And I was like, yeah, I've been here a few times, right? Talking about experience. She said, maybe we should get you a chest x-ray to see what's going on in there. And she called the doctor back in and said, they talked for a minute. He's like, yeah, let's get him a chest x-ray. And they sent me a couple doors down to get the x-ray. I brought it back, put it up on the screen. It was like all the air got sucked out of the room, right? And anyone who's been diagnosed with cancer, they know this feeling in this moment, right? And all of a sudden, I see this chest x-ray with a big hole in the middle of it. And they're like, that shouldn't be there, right? And I found out a few days later, it's a big tumor about the size of a grapefruit in the middle of my chest. And so the cancer had been growing for a while. It had spread most around my body, and it was a serious diagnosis. And, that was the beginning of a very strange turn in my life, as you can imagine. Being 25 years old, recently married, there's my wife Bonnie, having to move back into my parents' basement. I love you guys, but it's not where you want to be, When you're 6 months married, living in your parents' basement. And it was a really, really difficult time for me, right? Because a lot of the things that I had done with my life, climbing mountains, ski patrol, all that stuff that really mattered to me was just immediately sort of taken away. And I was now all of a sudden having to confront, I think a bit of a midlife crisis at 25. Who am I, right? What matters to me? And part of that, me trying to recover, or get through that time, was like, I think I need to talk with other people my age who know what this is like. And so I started, this is the early days of Facebook, so I started stalking people on Facebook. I managed to find 8 cancer survivors, young adults from across the country. And I said, hey, you guys have cancer, I have cancer. Let's go kayaking together. and for an adventure guide, that makes perfect sense. For all of them, I have no idea why they said yes, and they still don't know either. But we ended up going on an adventure trip, and as an afterthought, I asked one of my friends if he wanted to come along and film it. And we made our very first film out of that trip called Wrong Way to Hope. And it was way better than any of us thought it was going to be. So we actually ended up taking that film across the country to every major cancer center and doing grand rounds and in-services. And we had an RV. We did 40 screenings in 40 days. And it was an amazing experience for me. It was my first real interaction with the healthcare system. And I didn't really understand what was happening, but in every single screening we did, someone would stand up and say something like, I've been in oncology for 20 years, but what I learned from your story was, I was like, how are people learning from me? I've met 8 people in my life with cancer. I'm 25. I have 0 credentials. apart from pretty awesome ability to jump off cliffs with my skis on, right? Like that was my credentials at this point. And so it was sort of this this moment where I was sort of like, maybe the healthcare system needs more stories, or better told stories, so that people can continue to learn things like this. So after doing that film, the very last one that I did here in Calgary, which I think maybe some people here were at, the very last film screening of that, a wonderful woman named Janine Giese-Davis, Dr. Janine Giese-Davis, came up to me and said, Mike, I think you're the perfect person I've been looking for to start the cancer survivorship program here in Alberta. And I was like, really? Okay, yeah, like I've got nothing going on, sure, So we started running, we created a website, we started doing all these education sessions, we started building cancer survivor care plans and things like that. And we started doing what we called our Travel and Road Show. We would travel around all of Alberta, and we would book out entire gymnasiums, and we'd send invitations to cancer survivors. We'd get like 200 or 300 cancer survivors and caregivers in the room together, watching films, talking with professionals. It was just a really cool experience. I learned so much during those couple years with Janine. And also during this time, I was still running a charity that I started called Survive and Thrive Cancer Programs. And we would take, just like that very first film that we did, we would take young adults on adventure trips and turn them into films and use those to sort of raise awareness about the young adult cancer experience. And one of those, we went down the Grand Canyon, went rafting, immunocompromised people and outdoor adventures, sometimes it was a little hairy, but we went down the Grand Canyon and we filmed it. And we turned it into this web series for an organization down in the States. And on the way back from that, my buddy who I worked with on this, Aaron Bryant, he said, we were talking about how much we learned as we were editing these films, listening to these stories, and we came out of these experiences of making these films different people. Like, we learned so much in a short amount of time. And I was like, man, I wish everyone could have that experience, of making their own film about something that matters to them in their own life. And he's like, well, why not? Why not? Why can't you do that with people? And I was like, yeah, you're right, why not? Maybe I should start trying to help people make their own films. And so that led me to make, I figured sort of before I started doing this, maybe I should make one of my own. And so I made a digital story, my very first one, about an important moment in my cancer experience. And I'm going to watch it, we're going to watch this right now. It's sort of weird. You guys are going to learn a lot about me. You're going to get to see 25-year-old Mike in here. But as you watch, I just want you to think about one thing that resonates with you in the story. One thing that stands out to you. And then, we'll continue on and chat about it afterwards, maybe a little bit. But here we go, without any more. Here is my first digital story.
I'd been told that radiation was easy compared to chemotherapy. So it was with a celebratory feeling that I followed the blue line down the long, low-ceiling corridor in the basement of the hospital to meet with my radiation oncologist. As I waited in the exam room, I began to daydream about what my life would be like with cancer behind me in only a few short months. I could see the sea of mountains waiting to be climbed stretching out before me. I could almost feel the vertigo that comes from being high up on a granite wall. My forearms tight, fingers weak and aching, my lungs straining against my ribcage with exertion as I pushed higher and higher. The door suddenly opened, and there was my oncologist. We exchanged pleasantries, he flips open a manila folder, and we spend a minute or two talking about chemotherapy and my experience of it. Then he launches into a monologue about chest radiation that I know he's done 1,000 times before. I pick up bits and pieces, but one phrase stands out, scarring of the lungs. I interrupt. How much lung capacity could I lose to the scarring? Will I be able to breathe okay at higher altitudes? Well, it's hard to say, but considering the size of the mass and its placement in a thoracic cavity, the scarring could be substantial. You probably would not be able to go to high altitudes without having some difficulty breathing. I am standing up and slowly putting on my jacket as he looks up at me with a shocked and confused look on his face. Where are you going? I'm going home. I don't think that radiation is for me. But it's part of the protocol. Doing it will decrease your chances of recurrence to less than 20%. I know, but I need my lungs. A week later, I'm once again walking the blue line of the basement corridor to the exam room. I had already made up my mind, but he had made the effort to call me at home and sounded earnest when he said I should come back one more time to finish our discussion. I just want to make sure you have all the facts so that you can make an informed decision, he says as he closes the door. I can tell he's much more prepared this time. Attached to the manila folder are pages and pages of important-looking research papers with lots of tables and graphs. He begins to read me some numbers from a table, and then starts explaining a graph before I stand up and pull my jacket from the chair. No, wait, he says. I pause with one arm through my jacket. Slowly, he puts down the manila folder and stack of papers on the exam room counter. With a deep sigh, he takes off his glasses and rubs his eyes, pausing with his thumb and forefinger on the bridge of his nose. He drops his hand, and when his eyes open, the look on his face slowly changes. It's a look of recognition, eyes widening slightly and getting brighter, as if seeing me for the first time, as if some thin curtain between us has been pulled aside. Michael, I remember reading an article once about a blind man that climbed Mount Everest. What makes you think you couldn't climb Mount Everest with a smaller lung capacity? Stunned, I stand there for a long moment, jacket hanging from one arm. And with the curtain drawn, I recognize him too, climbing his own mountain. I slide the jacket off my arm and drape it over the chair. You're right, Dr. Balog. I've always liked a challenge. We both sit down and begin to talk. We talk like we are sitting on the floor of my apartment, surrounded by topo maps and climbing equipment, planning out our next adventure.
Very first digital story. So normally, now, I would say, let's talk, but I was sort of informed this is a lecture and I should probably do the talking. But normally, you have a really good conversation about what resonated with you in this story. And, this was a really sort of profound thing for me. But I made it for myself, right? I said this was an important moment in my own cancer experience. And I sort of just wanted to try out what it was like to make a digital story. I didn't know that it would, connect with others, but I did put Dr. Ballard's name in there. So I was like, I should probably send it to him and say, is it okay if I have your name in this presentation? So I sent it to him, and he wrote me back and said, Mike, that's amazing. Can I share it with a few people? And he shared it with a few people who shared it with a few people. And then about a month later, I got a phone call from a guy named Steven Siebold and his boss, who was currently transitioning into the role of CEO of AHS, Dr. Verna Yu. and they said to me, Mike, we just watched your story. It's amazing. Can we use it to build a curriculum about person-centered care that we'll share with all the new hires at AHS? And I was like, yeah, that sounds great, but what's person-centered care? I had no idea what this was. Of course, now I have a lot better idea of what some of these topics were. But it was amazing to me. We got to make that film. And I was also, or make that curriculum, that video curriculum. And I was also at that time doing lots of presentations all over the place. I just started showing this film in some of the Cancer Bridges things that we were doing and all the different presentations I was giving. And it was amazing to me how every single one of those conversations, there was something different that came out, right? As people started sharing what resonated with them, as we started learning about, having these conversations, all sorts of things. There's something called Patient-Provider Alliance that came out. A lot about identity, illness and identity. We talked a lot about communication skills, right? Treatment adherence is one that I didn't realize was such a big deal, but it's a very big one for medical professionals. Professional practice is another thing we talked about. And then we talked about a really interesting thing with some medical students once about something called the hidden curriculum, which I think a lot of people would know what these are. But this was so surprising to me. I was sort of like, how is this possible? How can people be learning from so much from a story that I just made because I thought it was important to me? Over the years, I've had even more conversations with this. And one of the coolest things about this lecture, preparing for this lecture, is I was trying to figure out what stories to share. I watched this story and I came up with a brand new interpretation that I'd never thought of before, that I think is somehow tied to the title of this lecture. The title was "They Might Be Right." And that actually comes from a quote from my favorite philosopher, Hans-Georg Gadamer, in his big book, Truth and Method. And the first time I read this quote, I had absolutely no idea what it meant. Like pretty much everything else you read that Gadamer writes, it's sort of like, what does this mean, you know? But over time, I started to understand, I think, a little bit more about what he was getting at. And I think this story helps us understand a little bit more about this quote, the possibility that the other person may be right is the soul of hermeneutics. That word hermeneutics, by the way, every once in a while I may say it, but it's sort of this big word about the theory, practice of interpretation. If I say that, just put in interpretation instead, right? That's another way to think about it. Is the soul of interpretation, if you want to say it that way. So how does this play out in the story? Well, you had these two people who had diametrically opposed opinions, right? And somehow they came to an understanding. And I think in this moment, Dr. Ballard was not thinking to himself, Mike might be right. You know, I think, I don't think that's what he was thinking. But there is an orientation that I think he took to that conversation, and an orientation that I also took to that conversation that opened the door for the possibility that the other person might be right. And I think what happens when you do that is it sort of softens your approach to the people around you. And so what does this look like? Well, I think as a 25-year-old ski patroller adventure guide, that you see in the film, from his perspective, not continuing on with radiation might have been the right call, right? Because he was about to lose the biggest piece of his identity, right? He was about to lose it all from his perspective. He could not climb mountains anymore. That's all that mattered to him, right? And from his perspective, and from his horizon of understanding, which we'll talk about in a moment, that might have been right. And also, couldn't it also be true that Dr. Bellog, is a middle-aged oncologist with a whole lot of experience and training, that continuing on with the treatment protocol might be right, from his horizon of understanding. And so I think, this idea of the possibility the other person might be right doesn't mean that they are, but it opens up an orientation to the other that allows for the possibility of understanding, right? And you saw it in there. It's amazing. Dr. Bellog, despite me being a totally different person than him, is able to transpose himself into my experience and understand what I'm saying, what I'm actually saying when I say I need my lungs, right? He's like, oh, this guy, right? He is losing his identity. Maybe I should try and talk to him using the language of climbing mountains, right? And because he could orient himself in that way, he was able to respond with what I thought was probably one of the best things he could have said, right? Which was, you can still achieve the life goals that you have for yourself with the long-term impacts of cancer, right? That's exactly what I needed to hear in that moment. You can still live this life with the limitations of cancer. So and I think what's sort of cool is I was able to also do the same thing, right? I noticed in the moment, right? He showed a little bit of emotion. I could tell he was a little upset, right? He actually cared about me and what he was saying to me. And when I sort of was able to recognize that, then all of a sudden I could sort of see this guy, he really wants the best for me, right? He's not trying to take away my identity, right? He's trying to do something that could help me maybe have more adventures in the future, right? And so this possibility that maybe Dr. Bellog was right, maybe Mike was right, that's actually what allowed us to have a really genuine conversation and actually understand each other and then move forward together. And I love this idea of horizons. We talked a lot about the horizons. I think this idea of they might be right is probably my favorite. The horizons are actually my favorite thing about hermeneutics. I'm a real nerd for philosophy stuff. But I love this horizons idea because I think the possibility the other might be right softens you enough. And there's actually a word when you think about this term fusion of horizons, which is a hermeneutic term that they use. And Nancy can say the word, I can't say it in German, but it has the connotations of melting butter. That's something I remember from your class. A fusion of horizons is like melting butter and mingling together. And it softens your orientation to the other. And when you are soft like that, right, think the possibility they might be right, then all of a sudden you can mingle your horizons together and maybe you can understand each other. And I don't know, has anyone driven near Drumheller recently? This is a photo from the summer. Maybe I love the idea of horizons because I'm from Alberta, right? In the big sky country. At one point we counted 86 power poles. It's amazing. They just like curl away. And here you can actually see like the curvature of the earth and things moving away from you. And what I like about the idea of horizon, right? The way that someone understands the world is that as you move towards the horizon, what happens? It also moves, right? You can see it. You know it's there, right? There is a horizon. I know it's there. But as you try and get towards it, it moves away from you. And I think this is a great metaphor for the idea of understanding, right? None of us can stand on the horizon, right? It's constantly moving. We are traveling towards it. It's moving away from us. We're not omnipresent. We can't stand on the horizon. We're not alive. We don't know objectively, right, the truth of the situation. All we can do is the best we can with the horizon that we currently have based on our own language, culture, and history. So anyways, I think Dr. Balog and I were both, we're traveling across Saskatchewan. He's in his car, I'm in mine. We're looking at, trying to find the truth of the moment, the situation, what should we do? And because we were soft, right, we were able to mingle together in these horizons and come to an understanding of how to move forward together, right? And I know this is a very sort of philosophical idea, but I just like the idea. I put this photo in there for a reason, right? Of me and him standing together on a mountain. This is not us, me and a buddy of mine, but this is sort of what it felt like. I was like, oh, I see where he's coming from. And he was like, oh, I see where he's coming from. And through that, we were able to choose a plan of action for moving forward. So yeah, that's, this idea. And now I've nicely muddied the waters for you for the title, right? They might be right. To me, what Gadamer was trying to get at with this quote is not that someone is right? That someone with a differing opinion from you is right, but an orientation towards the other person that opens up the possibility for understanding, right? And so I think that's a really profound thing that I've learned over the years, right? Coming into a conversation with this orientation, this softening of my own viewpoints, to think to myself, all right, I'm going to hear what they have to say. They might be right. I can approach them in a totally different way and look for an understanding together. So there we go. That's just sorry, it's a very long philosophical moment. We're going to back to the random adventures of Mike. So after this digital story, I was sort of like, okay, where are we going from here? Janine actually convinced me to go back to school, which I don't know how she convinced me, and I got into the master's program, like you mentioned. That's a whole story in itself. I won't talk more about that, but I'll just say 4-year recreation degree does not prepare you well for research level biostatistics. It does not. It's a miracle in itself that I graduated. I did. But I also started doing stories with Wellspring Calgary. Started working with cancer survivors to help them create their own short films. And it was pretty cool. I was just absolutely loving it. There's a little thing I got to do with Daryl Jans about the program at Wellspring. And then one day, you notice a lot of my stories start with one day I got a phone call. One day I got a phone call from this wonderful person right here, Dr. Catherine Lang. And Nancy, that's the only photo I could find from around that time. But it makes sense. There's glasses of wine on the table, and sort of what our conversations were like around that time. And so Catherine called me and said, Mike, I love what you're doing with digital stories at Wellspring. I think we should do a research project around this, and I'd like you to be my research assistant. And I was like, that's awesome, but what is digital storytelling? Because I didn't know what I was doing was actually a thing. It was a genre of media production that they actually had a theory and had been happening since the 80s, since the invention of personal computing. So that was probably the biggest turning point in the last 10 years of my life, right, was meeting Catherine. And of course, after those projects, Catherine and Nancy both convinced me that I should do a PhD. And so I did. And that experience, I would say it started already, but I think that experience of the first classes I did at the Faculty of Nursing were so transformative for me because all the things I've been experiencing over the past like 8 or 9 years of showing films, all of a sudden I started to understand how it worked, how these stories work. Like what was happening when someone stood up and said, I've been in oncology 20 years, but what I learned from your story was, like, what was going on in that moment? I didn't understand it. So yeah, we're gonna talk a little bit more about how stories work using another story by Emily. And like I mentioned, this story is made for the grief support program here in Calgary. They have like a 6-month waiting list to get into one of their grief groups, and they realized they needed to do something, right, for people while they're on this wait list. And so we created a bunch of digital stories that can go out to people, they can watch them, they can reflect on them. They also use these digital stories in grief groups to get really difficult conversations started. And then also in individual counseling, things like that. And so that's what this story was created for. And through Emily's story, we're going to talk a little bit more about how storytelling works. But again, as before I click play here, think about the one thing that resonates with you in this story. We're going to come back to that question a little bit afterwards. And so there is a content warning at the beginning of these because they're publicly available online and they deal with death and loss and grief. And so I always tell people, if you don't feel like you're in the right place to watch a story like this, you can just go to the bathroom, come back in 5 minutes. There's absolutely no reason not to do that if you don't feel like you're in the right place to do it. When people see these online, they watch the content warning, then they can choose to hit stop. And we really encourage people to do that. So here we go. So as we watch Emily's story, think about one thing that resonates with you.
Just so you know, I'm not afraid. Michael's ironclad composure suggested that he had rehearsed this line already, played out our theoretical conversation in his head, waiting for a rare moment alone with me in the fluorescence of his usually crowded ICU room. Despite the conviction in his eyes, I couldn't help but question the sincerity of his words. Tears soaking the neckline of my favorite sweater, I nodded in acceptance, all while wondering if his heroic display of bravery was simply a means to comfort his younger sister as he prepared to die. 1 year later, I spent my final morning with my mother, swallowing the persistent lump in my throat, preparing her for an elegant grand finale. As I brushed her teeth, making sure to reach all the spots in the back, I couldn't help but think about all the lasts we were experiencing. The last time I'd feel the skin of her soft, freckled arms as I lifted them into her t-shirt. The last time I'd smell her scalp as I kissed her forehead. In our last conversation, I soaked up everything I could, hoping for enough advice to last me at least through my 20s. I held her familiar hands as she told me to experience the most that I possibly could here on Earth. That I should travel, explore, look out for my sister, and always treat others with love and kindness. After that, we stood in a kitchen where Mom decided the lighting was best, swapping in and out of group photos, a beautiful but bizarre moment of distraction before she said her final goodbyes. As the doctor began the MAID procedure, I frantically searched Mom's eyes one last time for any signs of regret, ready to tear the plastic syringe from his steady hand, to tell him that my mom didn't actually want to die. But her tranquil disposition and intentional last "I love you" proved her bravery. 1 year later, I once again prepared to say a gut-wrenching goodbye. As my stepfather Ron began to organize his affairs, he insisted that I not uproot my new adventure living out west in order to care for my younger half-sister, Savannah. Sitting in his palliative care room at the hospital one day, I watched him work with the courage to ask my biological father and stepmother if they would take Savannah into their home once he passed. They graciously agreed, and for the third time, I witnessed true bravery at the end of life. A few months later, my sister and I walked through our empty childhood home for the last time. For so long, I'd wondered if the courage of my brother, mother, and stepfather was a facade meant to comfort the rest of us, the ones still living. As my thoughts echoed off of worn hardwood floors and bare walls, I came to realize that it doesn't really matter why they were brave, who it was for. The bravery in their final moments is the greatest gift they've given me, intentional or not. It instilled in me the courage to carry on living, to not fear death or where it takes us, to seek adventure and treat others with kindness, to reach out and ask for help when needed, to always know that I can lean on family, those here and those departed, in the face of adversity. Because choosing to live while grieving is brave.
We have discussion questions at the end. Yeah. Emily couldn't be here tonight. She's in Ontario. She was very excited though for you guys to see her story. I get to share Emily's story every once in a while in the right context. And just last weekend, I was doing a workshop with young adults whose parents had died of ALS. And so they were caring for their parents while they were teenagers. And it was a pretty amazing group. I decided to watch this story with them because I thought, yeah, let's watch it. And man, there were some really amazing things that resonated with them in the story. Of course, the whole idea of choosing to live, right? And how brave that is while grieving. There's lots of other things that stood out to them too, but one of the ones that really surprised me was the moment where they're taking photos in the living room with her mom. There was something about that was really meaningful for them. And, it was just for like a minute, someone said that, and then there was, people started crying, get a little emotional thinking about it myself. And then they, we just sort of sat together for a few minutes while people sort of let the emotion out. And then an amazing thing happened. They all just started sharing all the inheritance that they gained from their own families, right? From their own parents. And wow, it was amazing. And I feel very lucky I get to be part of those types of conversations quite often, where a story and what resonates with people in the story brings out these amazing conversations, this deep wisdom from below the surface of everyday life. I think a lot of the young adults that I was working with, they had lost their parents 5, 6, some of them 9, 10 years ago. And yet, through the story, they were able to access something really deep, and some deep wisdom came through Emily's experience that they were able to connect with. We talked for 45 minutes after this, as everyone was sharing all their inheritance from their parent, which was really cool. And I think that's why I love this question: what resonates with you, right? And the word, resonare, it's a Latin root. Resonantia means resonance, echo, reverberation. Just like the ripples in the pond, right? Of Emily's photo. I sometimes talk about, the echoes in your soul. Every time you watch a story, especially a real story told by a real person, there's something that echoes in your soul, something that bounces around, something that stands out to you. It could be a word, a phrase, an idea. But sometimes we're not very good at recognizing what's echoing for us. And it's often because we just consume stories, right? We don't participate in a story. We don't interpret. We don't try and understand. And that's what's so cool about that question, what resonates with you? It invites participation. I think stories really don't reach their potential without interpretation, right? Without participation in that story. And so, one of the things that really sort of helped me understand what was happening in those conversations, like the ones that I had last weekend, came from that first hermeneutics course that I did. I think I learned it from Catherine first, and then Nancy we talked a lot more about it. But this idea of aletheia, and I mentioned it already, but it's a Greek word that literally is translated, could be translated, unforgetfulness. Or maybe could be re-remembering. Maybe that's another way you could translate it in an opposite way. And you know, it was so cool to watch as we turned around Emily's experience, right? And as you sort of look at it from all the different sides, as people are thinking about what resonates with them in the story, you get to see the story from all different angles, right? And you sort of get to understand the whole thing and the whole idea that the bowl is a common metaphor in hermeneutics, and how when you look at one side, the other side is hidden from view. And so you have to turn it. And then when you look at that side, the other side is hidden from view. And so it's this constant turning around through conversation, right, of a story that's occurring as we ask that question, what resonates with you? And it's a constant re-remembering. It's a constant unforgetting. And I think, you know, I never really understood why those conversations were so powerful until I learned this concept. That, you know, you're turning around the story, you're participating in it, you're learning, you're seeing from all the different sides of it. You know, and so this was a really powerful understanding for me. But then I was also thinking about, but how does how are these conversations so endlessly generative, right? How is there just more things every single time? Even a story that I made myself like 14 years ago, I'm still finding new interpretations of it today for this lecture. How is this possible? And so I was actually doing a coffee chat with Graham McCaffrey, who a lot of you guys will know. I used to bother Graham a lot. I would just show up at his office and say, I'm buying you a coffee, come and let's chat about things. And we were talking about this idea, and I was like, so how does it, like, you know, how is there more stuff coming out? Wouldn't you eventually learn the whole bowl? Wouldn't you understand every single grain of the bowl? And he's like, yeah, you know, maybe there is a different type of metaphor that you could use to explain it. And so we sort of started thinking about aletheia as maybe a drill bit. As you turn around the story, as you look at it from all these different sides, it starts to drill down into the actual deeper meaning that's available right below the surface of the story, right? And then after that conversation, he gave me a book. He's like, I think you're gonna like this book. You know, of course he knew what was in it. And it was by this guy, Nicholas Davy. It's called Unfinished Worlds. And in this book, he talks about something called aquifers of meaning. And so, all of us know this, right? There's like rivers flowing under our feet right now, right? There's these aquifers. Water is always moving down there. But as we walk around in the world, we don't think about that, right? We're not aware of the rivers flowing underneath our feet. We need some way to access that water in order to understand what's happening. And that's what he said artworks do. He said artworks are artesian wells, right? They drill down through the surface to the water below and allow it to flow up under natural pressure. And aquifers of meaning, he says all of language, culture, and history. It's underneath our daily interactions. It's in the language we use. It's in the way we interact with each other. All this stuff comes with us, but we're not often aware of it until we have a way to tap into it. And it's through artworks, it's through something like a story, like Emily's story, that allows us to tap into the deeper meaning that's always been available to us, but we just haven't had a chance to turn around that conversation and learn from it. And that's, I think, what happened for all those young people who lost their parents at a very formative time of life. They, I don't think, ever had an opportunity, right, to engage with something, to turn it around in a way that allowed them to drill down into these deep pieces of meaning that were below the surface, even 9 years later, and new ideas, new meaning, new wisdom was able to come up through Emily's story, even though it was by a different person, told in a different time and place, and not even about the same illness many times, right? So I love this idea about how stories work. First of all, we turn things around, aletheia, right? And as we turn things around, we get to tap into these deeper underlying meanings that are always below the surface of our daily experiences, but get sedimented over just by the busyness and the craziness of life sometimes. And so this was really profound for me to learn, right? I was like, wow, this is what's happening. This is how stories work. And it really emphasized to me even more the importance of a good story that's well told, right? You need to tell stories well in order for them to act as these artesian wells that can bring these things up. And man, did Emily tell a good story. It's a powerful story. The way that she chose to tell it, and the way that she chose to use these brave moments that she witnessed to teach us something about how to live while you're grieving. I'm very fortunate. I get to do lots of visual storytelling all over the place and keep making films. And so after the PhD, which was amazing for me because Catherine and Nancy actually let me make a film for my PhD, which I think is still the coolest thing that I've done to do. I was looking for funding for this film. And I was calling around. I called the TELUS Fund. And I said, hey, can you give me money to make this? We're not going to fund your PhD. But we love the idea of you going around and making digital stories with people and then filming that process and filming these conversations where you watch people turn these things around. So we got to make a film, a series called Being There, where, and actually my producer for the series is here in the audience, Joel Goundry, right there, the dapper man, very dapper. I've never seen him look this good, and I said he was hyping me up to it. But anyways, so we got to travel around the country, and we would sit in people's living rooms, and we'd help them tell stories about what it was like to be a caregiver for a child with a severe disability, right, or a caregiver for someone who suffered a catastrophic brain injury, right? And we got to learn from all these stories, and we filmed them live. We created this series. And that was sort of we won a couple awards for that one. And so Stories for Caregivers, which is the platform from TELUS Fund, they were like, hey, what else you got? And we're like, oh, I've got some ideas. Let's go on adventure trips and talk about caregiving. It was fun how life takes you back around sometimes. And so we just got to do a series that was renewed for 3 seasons where we take people on adventure trips and talk about caregiving and use the adventures as metaphors for the things that we were learning while we were out there. And actually, this week, This week, Joel, has that been done? We just finished a short film that was a spin-off from this Caregivers in the Wild series called Like a Mountain, Mindfulness for Young Caregivers. And basically, we took a young caregiver out into the Yukon, and we talked about mindfulness, how you can use mindfulness to support your well-being as you're caring for a parent with, in this case, it was a severe mental health challenge. And so, it's so cool how, those random paths that you take, Catherine gave me a phone call one day, ended up taking me down all these different roads. And I love every single one of those stories, but I have to say, one of my favorites is the one with Cheryl and Cynthia. And it's called The Nature of Healing. And so we're going to watch this final story. It's a little bit longer, but you'll get to see an adventure that we got to have together. And it will sort of provide some final thoughts for us as we think about this idea of interpretation. So here we go. The Nature of Healing.
It was discovered in 1971 when they found one of the best kept secrets in North America.
My name is Dr. Mike Lang. As both a health researcher and adventure guide, I've seen how spending time outdoors can enhance the well-being of family caregivers. Cynthia is a member of the Stoney Nakoda Nation and has chosen to become an advocate for missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls after experiencing that same injustice in her own family. Together with Cheryl Chagnon Grey Eyes, an elder of Cree and Métis descent, we will spend time out on the land, engaging in ceremonies and talking about the challenges of being a caregiver for families facing the devastating loss of a loved one. This is Caregivers in the Wild.
You guys feel that calmness?
Mm-hmm. I feel it. You hear the wind in the leaves and the
Yes.
birds,
Yes.
and you don't hear any traffic noise.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. When was the last time you were able to do something like this?
It's been a long time. It's been since 2017. It's been goal after goal, day after day.
Hi, Cheryl.
Okay, unsaid.
Okay.
What was that? Oh, hello, my little, how are you? When you give tobacco, it is from your heart to my heart to Creator.
Great. Well, welcome. I'm so glad you're here. So we thought we'd go for a walk, and then you're going to take us medicine picking. You and Cynthia have never been able to do this together.
No,
We tried.
You're making it happen. That's awesome.
thank you.
Cool. Well, yeah. Let's get situated, and then we'll go do it.
Awesome.
For a walk.
Oh, this is so cozy. I love this. I love sleeping in a teepee. I don't know, it's like coming home for me.
I've been a caregiver all of my life. I have 6 children and 19 grandchildren. To me, there's no beginning and there's no end, because it's just what I was brought into. With MMIW, it was my choice, because nobody was caring for these families at all. If somebody's missing, the family members will get a hold of me and ask me if I can keep an eye out on, helping them look for their loved ones. I'm talking about their stories to other people and going to marches and hearing their names being said. So that's how I caregive. I make them realize that they're important. And I never got that when that happened to me. I care so much. It's what I go to bed with when I sleep. We need to start healing in order to help heal everybody around us.
While I was singing that last verse, I was looking up and I was thinking about our sisters in spirit. There was this flash of red dresses in the trees. And I know that we're here. And we're surrounded by spirit.
Is this a really emotional activity? Like when you're here, it just comes out?
Every ceremony I go to, I cry. I have to let it out
Yeah.
and leave it there.
Yeah. You've done this with lots of women. What do you see occur for them as they're out here?
We always come, okay, we're going to get sage and we're going to smudge with it, and that's the purpose. However, once you get here, because you're on the land, and it's connected to a lot of spirit, it's about healing.
The plan tomorrow is we will try and find the medicine gate.
Yeah. You got it.
Yeah, so we'll do our best to find it. So, Cheryl, tell us a little bit more about the medicine wheel.
So far it's gone back to 5,200 years old.
Yeah, wow.
So it's older than Stonehenge in Britain. It's older than the pyramids. Thank you, Creator, for blessings received. Thank you, Mother Earth, for the gifts of your bounty.
Since I was a little girl, I've always wanted to come here and here.
I love watching you walk around the rocks. I could sense the weight being gone, or being lifted.
Thank you for bringing me here. I need this.
Yeah, come on over. I was thinking back to sort of my experiences in life and the circle. To me, it's a picture of community.
Yeah, because a circle has no beginning and no end.
Yeah.
And it shows that we're all interconnected.
Mm-hmm. You guys ready?
Yeah.
When you lean back together, you can all support each other.
That's right. And very much a good metaphor for this weekend.
Yeah. I think, many caregivers carry around emotional wounds as a result of their work. And yeah, I think engaging in ceremonies and rituals that are meaningful to them could be a place to start healing.
You have to do that. That healing process needs to start now so that we can carry on for that next generation.
I always forget to thank you guys for also doing all the music in there. This is awesome, you did everything. This is one of the most viewed episodes. And Cheryl and I were talking a little bit about why do people want to watch this, right? And I think it probably has something to do with, all the conversation that's had around, truth and reconciliation, but what does that actually look like, right? What is it in action? Right? And I think that's partly why, is we got to see, what it could look like, right? Despite the 94 calls to action and all the words, like what does it physically look like to happen? And, I think one of the other reasons I think that it's so meaningful is because it just feels so real and organic, right? And that sort of helps us think about the one final thing that I want to talk about, which is this idea of genuine conversation. And I'm just going to actually read this quote from Gadamer, from his book, Truth and Method. We say that we conduct a conversation, but the more genuine a conversation is, the less its conduct lies within the will of either partner. Thus, a genuine conversation is never the one we wanted to conduct. Rather, it's generally more correct to say that we fall into conversation, or even become involved in it. And I love this idea, and the idea of falling into conversation, because that's really what we try and do, right? With digital storytelling, with all of our films, all of these things, try and create an environment where we can fall into conversation, and we don't know what's going to come out, right? I think a lot of the conversations we have these days have all these predetermined outcomes, right? We know exactly what we're trying to do, right? And in healthcare, we have a lot of conversations where we know exactly what the goal of this conversation is. It's so uncommon now to fall into conversation with someone and just see what comes out, right? See what bubbles to the surface of that conversation. See the meaning that arises. And I think my favorite sort of scene, I guess you could say, Cynthia, is when we were sitting on the rock, and that was an amazing 15-minute conversation. It was a really meaningful conversation. We only included like 30 seconds of it in here. But just, I said as she was doing that, I could just feel the weight lifting, right, from all this intense caregiving situations. And then she said, thank you for bringing us here. We didn't know why we were going to Nixon-Milwaukee. Cheryl just said we should go there, and so we decided to go. And what needed to happen did, right? It was able to arise from that conversation. And I think when you enter into conversations in this way, right, without a predetermined outcome, a genuine conversation where you're not conducting a conversation, you just get to see what happens. It makes you a little more, I think, sensitive to not just what is said, but what is unsaid, and perhaps what is unsayable in that story. And I think Cynthia and I had a moment of unsayable, right? We couldn't communicate. We just knew it was important, right? And I think, I think a lot of the conversations we have these days are pretty surface level, right? We don't often get into what's not being said. And I think in a clinical conversation, there's a lot that's not being said, in those conversations. I think learning more about how to fall into conversation could help us deepen some of those conversations that we have and see what rises up to the surface. So what does all of this have to do with the hyper-polarized world? Final thought for the day. I think, if we start with this orientation towards other people, that they might be right, and we soften ourselves so that there might be this mingling that occurs, this fusion of horizons, right? If we can start there, that orientation, the other person might be right, the possibility of understanding is presented. Then I think if we share our stories openly and honestly, and take the time to turn them around together, right, by asking what resonates with you in this story, and listening to what other people are saying, then maybe some of the deeper meaning can start to come up through these conversations of what people are really saying, and we can start to understand each other a little better. And then finally, if we can not fall into conversation, or not have a predetermined outcome, but fall into conversation with people, we may become more sensitive to not what people are saying, to what they're not saying, or that perhaps to reverse some of the hyperpolarization that's occurring in our world today. And you know, it brings us all the way back to this idea, right? Ubuntu. I am because we are. I think it's very easy for us to forget that. You know, we forget the ways that the people that we interact with, the things that we experience in our life, the language, the culture, the history, all those things help us become who we are, including people around us. And you can't run away from yourself. You know, you need to figure it out. And I think that's sort of where we're at right now, right? And I think if we could all remember this, right, this idea, I am because we are. I think those conversations can become a little bit more than pointing fingers and yelling, and an actual, real attempt to understand each other so that we can move forward together. So thank you again for watching the stories, for putting up with my stumbling through philosophy, and just, being the people who show up for events like this. It's been really awesome to share some of these ideas with you guys, so thank you.